Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture. Albion never dies. In this episode, I have a very special guest, Max James Joy, who is a British man living in China. Now, he works for a school, he's a teacher, and he's involved in a British Day, which is coming up on the 2nd of November. It'll be celebrated in Guangzhou at Canton Place. Ever since 2010, BritCham's British Day has been a significant event in the Greater Bay Area, celebrating British culture, gathering friends from all over the world. It'll be a full day of activities. We'll talk about it in about 20 minutes. Until then, do enjoy this very special interview with Max James Joy.
Okay, Max, thank you very, very much for joining me today. I'm calling from the UK. Where are you?
Nice to be here, Thomas. Right now, I'm in Guangzhou, China.
Fantastic. And what led you to be out there?
Well, this is my current job working in China. Originally, I was working in Jiangsu, which is near Shanghai. And right now, I'm in Guangzhou, which is it's near Hong Kong. And I'm currently working at an international school. So I would say this job is a bit of an upgrade compared to my last job as an English teacher at a training center.
Yeah, so I think we first knew each other because you were working for EF, and so was I, and that was when you were based in, was it Jiangsu? So.
That's right. So yeah, I was working for EF English First. I worked there for about 5 years, first in Changshu, and then in Zhangjiagang. There's sort of like small cities in Jiangsu. And it was very focused on teaching English, mostly to primary school age kids and kindergarten kids, and a little bit to secondary school kids as well. But it is very different from what I'm doing now. I'm now a UI teacher, unit of inquiry. So it's very similar to teaching science and sociology. And I'm currently working with primary school.
And these kids are from, well, all over the world, right?
Oh, yes. We got quite a varied bunch. A lot of them are from Hong Kong because my school, ASJ, its full name is Affiliated Schools for Hong Kong and Macau Students. But we have students from other countries. I've got Japanese students, Australian students, Americans, Canadians, Malaysians. We got students from all over, but the most common theme is we teach in English and Chinese. And as a UA teacher, I still need to get used to the fact that I'm not teaching English. I'm trying to teach sort of like critical thinking skills and problems and phenomenons around the world. So that's a bit of a challenge for me. So I'm so used to correcting students and trying to make sure that they're speaking fluently. But now I'm just looking more at their thinking and their research and how they approach different topics that we encounter in class.
And with students, young students from all over the world, including, I guess, mainland Chinese and Hong Kongese, right?
Yes, that's right. So there's a bit of a difference between mainland Chinese students and Hong Kong students. So Hong Kong students are more internationally minded. So in the classroom, they can be more independent. They're able to think critically. They're able to question. They don't do the thing where they say, teacher, can I go to the bathroom? Teacher, can I throw away my rubbish? No, they just go ahead and they do it. They know what they want to do. They know how to handle themselves. Whereas sort of mainland school students are a bit more used to being told what to do. Not to say that Hong Kong students are better. They just have different behaviors. So, for example, I can say Hong Kong students speak better English, they're more independent, but mainland school students, they're much better when it comes to reading and writing. The learning style they have there is very drill and memory focused. And since learning Chinese, in my opinion, the Chinese language is quite memory focused. So they definitely are much better at learning that and writing that. And even when it comes to writing English, they find it easier to write English words because they just really drill and memorize a lot in the school. So two different styles of learning, and we accommodate that at ASJ.
That's really, really interesting. And I'm suddenly realizing how long you've been in China. You've been there quite a
Yes.
while.
Oh goodness. I'm starting to feel old. I first I first came to China in 2018, and I only moved to Guangzhou at the beginning of 2023. I would say there's quite a difference between the area around Shanghai and the area around Guangzhou. Again, just from my opinion, being in Guangzhou, I feel like the people are more talkative, more active, and I would say a bit more business minded.
That is the kind of the Cantonese stereotype, right? Because obviously Guangzhou is old Canton City.
Yeah, I've heard the stereotype before, and compared to I wouldn't say up north. I would like Shanghai is middle China,
Yeah.
but to me it's up north. I would say yeah, Shanghai and people around there, they're a bit more reserved, a bit more cold, more in control of their emotions and their face. So in China, they have this thing called face, where it's what how they think people perceive them, sort of like a bit like a mix between an ego and their reputation. But they're more concerned with that, I think.
Yeah, because people often talk to me about East Asian face, but of course my time was all in Shenzhen, which is one of the mega cities between where you are and Hong Kong, actually. And I was totally dealing with adults there, so I never found it so strong. It obviously exists. No one likes to look a fool in front of everybody. Perhaps more there than here being Yorkshire. But I noticed it more from those from outside of Shenzhen, from other parts of China.
Yes, I mean, even when I was in Jiangsu, I was reminded, oh, if somebody says "Gunbei," make sure you stand up and cheers with them when you drink your drinks together. Don't sit down and do it because that's very rude. Like I was being reminded quite a few times to mind my manners in Jiangsu, mostly because I wasn't aware of some of the specific Chinese manners that they had when eating and drinking at the table. But also they were more concerned about it. Whereas down south, people are more sort of laid back about it, not so concerned. And I think that's why I'm more comfortable because I'm a very clumsy, forgetful person. So when it comes to etiquette and social grace, I'm a very foolish person. So I fit in much better in the South.
I'm curious to compare experiences, right? Because you come into a country, not knowing its social customs. It's not necessarily something you can Google because it's interpersonal, it's relationships. For me, it was when you cheers, how high your glass is compared to the other person's glass.
Oh goodness, is that another thing I've forgotten?
Oh yeah. Well, I got it was something that came up for me of, if you're senior, then your glass is higher. For me, that was relatively straightforward, right? When the glasses clink together.
I feel like this is saying a lot about me that I'm learning about this from you, an Englishman who's not in China anymore.
It was something that came up for me, and I had the designated seat, right? So I was the director of studies of the adult center, so I had to sit opposite the door because I was the most senior in the office.
Oh yeah, they do the seat placement, yes.
Yeah, but even going to dinner, I always had to save my mind. I was like, to be honest, it'd be quite nice to be near the door so I can pop to the bathroom when I want to. But I have to be hemmed in sometimes in relatively crowded restaurants, the far end of the door.
Goodness. Yeah, like this is what I mean. Like they're so they're very concerned about it to the smallest details, and a lot of that would just fly over my head. So I think that's just why I prefer being in Guangzhou right now. Just more comfortable, more laid back.
But it's interesting because China has many cultures, right, within it. And I mean, I've seen English people surprised when I've talked to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, right, which is part of life in China. But you have moved between different regions and it sounds like different tiers. Well, you have, yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So I think definitely for when I first came to China, but also when I speak to my family when I come back to England, the thing that they don't quite grasp is there is a big difference between not just the city tiers, but just like the city center and the outskirts of the city. There's a big culture difference. Because on the outskirts, you'll find more of like the rural people, the village people, especially the older people tend to live around there who aren't used to the city life. And then when you go to like the city center where all the shopping centers are and all the big roads and all the landmarks, the people there, it feels like most cities I've visited, like it feels very urban and cosmopolitan. You see um, the different I won't say foreigners, but I am a foreigner. I'm just so used to Chinese people saying foreigners about everything.
Yeah.
I've been calling them foreigners too. Just seeing all the different nationalities of people coexisting. Like when I go to London, it's the sort of similar thing. And, you know, just crowds of people just going about shopping, eating, chatting, looking at landmarks. It feels very familiar in that regard. But yeah, the outskirts of the city, which I have visited quite a few times when I do when I go out or when I want to visit some friends. Yeah, it's also quite different because the further you go, the more it feels like you're going back in time. Because some of these places they don't have they're quite sparsely populated or they're very far apart. Some places don't they seem like they were built like 200 years ago. Like they don't have very modern like toilet facilities, or they don't even have a lot of cars over there. But it's still a very interesting thing to look at because just seeing how like the people still live in that kind of way just sort of tells you a lot about their culture, the way that they care about their family a lot, the way that they're quite industrious, hardworking, the way that they sort of like just do their work like farmers. They gather their crops and then they sell it in the city. It just feels like everybody's just going with the flow and they're not really like phased about this. But for me, just to see this, it's just quite interesting, and I just want to like find out more about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that feeling of going to these smaller places. It is like going back in time, including I can recall the CRT televisions, you know, the old tube televisions. And I'm just like, what decade am I in? The roads weren't always finished.
Absolutely. And like, I mean, there's just so many bizarre things you can witness there. Like seeing like these horse or donkey drawn carts transporting goods, or these funeral processions going on, the ones where they like blow up the fireworks and they're burning money, or just like even when you go to like a very far out restaurant and you ask for some food and then you just see them like kill the animal in front of you and serve it to you fresh. Like that stuff is just so, I mean, very different, but also very interesting at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a similar experience traveling with some of the EF managers. We went out on a team building to a remote Cantonese village, right? And so I grew up in the countryside. I'm with an American who's like grew up around fish markets and things like that. But the Cantonese dialect was one that we couldn't speak. So we sent one of the local girls who spoke the dialect to go and choose the fish, basically. But she had grown up in Shenzhen, right? She'd never been out to the countryside. She had zero awareness, and she came back white as a sheet because they'd killed a fish in front of her, which, to be honest, made myself and the American chuckle quite a bit. We were less shocked by this than she was, but she had a real culture shock visiting a village in her own country. She'd never done it before.
Oh goodness, the poor girl. But I mean,
and us laughing at her.
Gosh, I suppose, like, you know, especially for the very younger people, the very very young adults and teenagers, like they've sort of they sometimes forget like where they came from. Like they don't like, even just going back one or two generations, there's a very big difference between the grandkids and their grandparents, because the grandkids probably could have spent their entire lives within the city and its comforts and have forgotten what their grandparents are doing on the same day on the city outskirts or in the village, doing things that seem to be 100 or so years older. I mean, yeah, it's just very, very bizarre to think about. And it's not just a culture shock for us, but a culture shock for some of the Chinese themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. I need to pick up on one more thing that you mentioned, which I know what it means. I think a few people will be interested in burning money. What's that
Burning
all about?
money? Yes. So I've seen quite a few funerals go on outside of my apartment, which I guess is normal because Chinese residential places are very dense. The apartment places are very tall and very packed. So with that many people, no doubt you're going to get a few people dying every week or so. So quite often you'll see a funeral, and I know each region and sometimes each village has its own distinct way of doing a funeral. But one of the most common elements of it is giving offerings to the deceased in the afterlife, which can include giving them food, doing fireworks to make loud noises to scare off evil spirits, I think, and burning money. And I believe it's not real money, but they purchased this paper money. I think it's like in the style of how the money was a long time ago. So they purchase big bundles of this money and they burn it at the shrine of the deceased. And they believe it gives good fortune and gives wealth to their deceased family member in the afterlife. And you can just see them getting big stacks, probably weighing kilograms.
Yeah,
and
they're quite
just
big wads, aren't they?
pile it on. Yeah, very big wads. And they share it around and they all throw it and burn it. They don't have a concern for the smoke it makes and the pollution it might do, because they do this happily in public. Like they might just do it right next to your apartment door, or they might just do it in front of a shop. Like they don't have any concern about what's going on around them, but they just do it. And probably because there's not really that much space in China to be doing these things, so they just do it on the streets anyway. But I just found it very shocking to see them just do it so openly in the public, because, you know, in the UK and probably a lot of the Western world, our funerals are quite private and more quiet. But here in China, they're very loud and very public.
I know an Irishman he went to a Chinese funeral having zero idea of what to expect. And so I was quite surprised. First of all, they all got drunk, and he's like, "Well, I can kind of match this." And then he was asked, as a relatively larger man, to help carry the coffin of this person he didn't know, and they were throwing fireworks at them as they were going along to scare away the spirits.
Yes.
I thought it was in World War III, to be honest, all the fire and the fireworks and the smoke.
Goodness. It's funny you say that. I was in a similar situation, not carrying the coffin, but when I was taking part in a funeral for a deceased, we had to wear these white robes, and we had to walk this length around a village. And as we were doing it, they were throwing fireworks at us too. And it's not just the little firecrackers, but it's like the actual small-sized proper fireworks that they throw at you. So it's all big explosions and noises and colors. And I actually got a piece of shrapnel in my foot near the end, and I was limping. And I wasn't sure, oh God, would it be so rude if I just take a pit stop and look after my foot, or should I just limp the rest of the way through? I was a bit worried, so I just knuckled down and finished it. But that really, really hurt.
And that's the thing about being the foreigner in the culture, is that you don't know what happens when you do this. Like, what is it polite? Is it accepted? Is it weird? What's weird? Because it's all weird to me.
I mean, you're absolutely right about that. Like you're sort of treading around eggshells. You don't want to come off as rude, because you want to be respectful. And especially since being a foreigner, you're sort of like a representative for your country. You don't want to give a bad name to your country by doing one bad thing in a very sensitive moment. So because you do have that pressure on you.
In a country like China, everyone walking down the street, if they see you, they know you're not Chinese. For those who can't see you, you just don't look it.
You're saying this to a 6'3" ginger man. People see me from a mile away. But you're absolutely right. The people, they'll look at you, they know you're not Chinese, and gossip will go around in your neighborhood, and everybody knows there's a foreigner living there.
Yeah. I mean, my memory is that, taxi drivers would take pictures of me and post it on social media whilst I was in the car. And I think my favorite one was he wrote out, and I could see it. He had large print on his phone. I could see it. He typed out, I have a foreigner in my car. And then he stopped, turned around and said, where are you from? And I said, England. And he just changed it from, I have a foreigner to, I have an Englishman. I thought, oh, that's so nice. Actually, really nice.
I bet you made his day with that little visit.
He made my day. Not just a foreigner.
I mean, it's like you do sort of feel like a little bit like a mini celebrity, depending on where you are. I mean, if it's in the city center, there's a lot of foreigners there. It's sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, foreigners, nothing new, nothing special. But when you're in the outskirts of the city, similar to me, or like in a very rural place or a village, you do sort of become like a mini celebrity. And people get very excited, especially shops or restaurant owners. They really want you to like come, and they want to show off that there's a foreigner in their business. They'll be like, oh, yeah. Sit next to the window. Oh, and here's some free food. Oh, and please stay. We'll give you another drink. And they really want to show off that they got a foreigner there because they think it says something good about their business. They use it as an advertisement.
Well, that's really good to know. And because most of my time in China, that was absolutely true. And then during the pandemic, it was like, no, you hide around the back. And then it started to be more like you be in the front again. So it's interesting to see how these things can change.
Yes, that's a good point. The COVID thing, goodness. Yeah, that was like when COVID happened. And, sometimes when you got a bit of like a tickly throat and you just want to cough. But doing that as a foreigner during COVID time in China was like, oh, people are going to stare and say very bad things about you because, I think with a lot of countries, but there was sort of like the narrative going around that foreigners were like spreaders of COVID. So that gave them a very sort of negative stereotype at the time.
Yeah. So I went from complaining that people were pushing against me, or on one occasion, a girl just leaned against me on the metro. But I went from that to people, avoiding me, like taking a different carriage or just moving. Like one looked at me, got up, walked away. That was it. Carriage to myself sometimes. Yeah.
I think being teachers, sometimes that's a good thing because with your job, you're spending most of your day around children. And some of your encounters can be parents or grandparents pushing their child to try and talk English to you. And it's sort of that awkward thing where the kid obviously does not want to talk, but they're being forced by their family to speak English to make use of their English lessons. And you're just like, oh please get this over and done with. But sometimes that sort of like space they give you can be appreciated.
Yeah.
But now that COVID has mostly gone nowadays, and now it's sort of gone back to the way it was where foreigners are mini celebrities. Now you find yourself on the end of getting photos and looked at and talked about.
And you will be talked about. You mentioned before we were on air that you're going to have an English day.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me. I'm so forgetful. My school is participating in the British Day. It will take place on the 2nd of November in Guangzhou, Canton Place. And it's basically like a festival sort of thing where different companies and organizations gather. They set up stalls and booths, and they have food, music, culture sharing, and activities to encourage people to participate and appreciate Britishness. We say Britishness. I think it's probably more of like and celebrate internationalness.
Okay.
But because there's a lot of international people that go there and just talk about international things outside of China. And I don't think a lot of people can distinguish a lot of it anyways. I mean, I think to a lot of Chinese people, they're like Canadians, Australians, South Africans. They're all the same. So you just sort of go with that vibe. But so this British Day, my school will have a booth there, and we will be very open and welcoming to anyone who attends. So I hope anyone who might visit China or is in China now listening to this podcast, please come on by and say hello. I will probably be there. So you can visit this forgetful 6'3" ginger boy.
I think they'll be able to spot you then.
Free advertising.
Yeah. I was just curious what an English day would be, because we don't really have a British National Day. It's not something that we celebrate. You know, there's an Indian National Day, a Turkish National Day. There's Chinese National Day is what, yesterday? At time of recording, it was recent.
A Chinese National Day. It was either yesterday or today. I haven't really been keeping up with it.
But it's not something we do, right? Lots of countries celebrate themselves.
Yeah.
It's like there's no British Day.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's actually a very good point. Yeah, an English day. Because there's like St. Andrew's Day, which is a very sort of like Scottish pride thing, and St. Patrick's Day, which is an Irish pride thing. Do we have something similar or
We
equivalent
do
to
have
that?
St. George's Day. It's very unusual to celebrate it that much. I've seen it like in villages, but not in cities so much.
Yeah, well, because like normally when you say St. Patrick's Day, people are like, "Oh yeah, beer, leprechauns, and Irish people." You say St. George's Day, and they'll be like, "Huh?"
Yeah, yeah.
Not as famous worldwide.
It's not such a, I'll have my English breakfast and a cup of tea, but it's hard to.
Yes. Oh goodness, you make me miss English food so much. I haven't had a full English breakfast in so long.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, yeah. It's a big part of our
Yeah,
culture, isn't it?
it is. I mean, the last time I visited the UK was in the summer holiday. I think that was around July time. And before that, I think it was several years before I visited England again. So, yeah, when I went back to England this summer, I just really had this craving to bring back all the English snacks and goods back to my home in China. So I was stocking up on Marmite and Cadbury's and all the good stuff that you can only get in England, and just putting it in a suitcase and taking that to China so that can last me till my next visit to England.
That's wonderful to hear, because English food gets a bad rap around the
Yes.
world, but it's decent. It's more decent than people realize.
It is. I mean, a lot of it's comfort food, and you're right, it gets a very bad reputation because people like to make jokes such as, "Oh, ha ha, English people eat like the Germans are still bombing them." "Oh, ha ha, English food tastes bad if you make it right." You know, they say very crazy things like that. I think it's because our food doesn't look quite appealing or fancy. But also, I think there's a bit of history there because we only stopped our rationing, I think it was maybe 10 or 15 years after World War II ended.
Yeah.
Which was quite a lot later compared to other countries. When my grandfather was a young man, he was conscripted into the army because that was still active about a decade after World War II. And that was also the same with the rationing. There was still food shortages on many important items such as meat and butter and such. So because of that situation, it sort of cultivated this food culture where British food would have to be more filling and practical in a way to make up for the lack of things that they could access.
Yeah.
So you look at foods like shepherd's pie, bangers and mash, that sort of stuff. It's very potatoey. It's very vegetable based as well, especially root vegetables, because that's what they had a lot of. But also it's filling, it's nutritious. So they were just making do with what they could do. And I think that sort of contributed to sort of like the food culture we have today, where, yeah, it doesn't look fancy, it doesn't look amazing, it doesn't have a lot of very good stuff, but it's very good for family meals.
In some ways, a bit like fashion, right? So French fashion is often brilliant for high catwalk fashion, but you wouldn't wear it in the street. Whereas like the London fashion show, I mean, a lot of that you could just go out and wear in the street. So you get a very different feel.
Yes, that is true. I mean, you know, French food gets this reputation for being very gourmet. And I visited quite a few French restaurants in Guangzhou. And yeah, the food is very delicious, no doubt about that. It looks good. The portion sizes are so small and the prices are so high. Sometimes I just fancy a good old toad in the hole. That's a very nice British dish, simply because it's very filling and very satisfying to eat.
I think it's the "Come Fly With Me" that has the joke, which is I just like traditional British food, like Indian and Chinese.
Ah, yes, come fly with me. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is a good joke. I think, you know, that makes me think about sort of like the food culture in China and England, where um like especially coming back to the difference between the older generations and the younger generations. So of course the older generations would be more go on more about British food, the traditional Sunday roast and the fish and chips, whereas the younger generations would be more talking about sort of like getting a kebab and chips, or um, eating at more international exotic places. Like in my village, Fetcham, we have a Polish restaurant, we had a Brazilian one, and we have a Chinese one. And you would see more younger people there eating, but at the sort of like the more traditional like British tea shops or fish and chips, you would see like more older people eating there. And it's a bit similar in Guangzhou, where you often see the older people eating like the more traditional or like the food that was sort of like more popular a long time ago, sort of like I noticed like they like to eat like organs and meat with bones in it, whereas the younger people would prefer to eat their meat boneless, and they're not so into organ dishes. So it feels like when your city or when your country becomes more international, when different cultures come, the younger generation sort of grow, adapt with it, and change their eating habits.
Thank you very much. It's a really interesting observation. Can I just quickly ask, question of the podcast, what is Britishness?
What is Britishness? Oh goodness, the pressure is on me. I have to answer that quickly. I mean, I think nowadays Britishness. Well, I'll definitely tell you what it means to be a British person traveling abroad. It means a lot of people around the world speak a degree of English, even if it might not be their first language. It could be their second language or third language, but English is, in a very informal sense, considered like a world language or a business language, because a lot of people speak it. And just traveling around the world as a British person, I realized I did not have to put in a lot of effort to learning a lot about different languages. It felt like a bit like a privilege to have sort of like this easy time going around, traveling, and expecting other people to speak English. And when I sort of realized maybe, if I actually started trying to learn to speak Chinese, I could learn more about the Chinese culture. And that was true. I was taking Chinese classes last year, and I now have not a good ability, but a decent ability to go my way in China, ordering food and getting directions. And I realized sort of like how, I don't know, I don't want to go on about this whole privilege thing, but it does feel a bit like a privilege to sort of be English, to just have that ability to speak very, very good English. Because you often find like the people, the main thing in China, the main thing people comment on when they talk to you is your accent.
Yeah.
And when they notice you've got a strong American or British accent, they go, "Oh, wow, your accent is so good. It's so wonderful." And parents and some businesses that like voice acting businesses really like the accent because it's very appealing. It's very strong. You see a lot of Chinese people commenting on like Tom Hiddleston or Benedict Cumberbatch and their accent and how it makes them very attractive and sound very appealing. So I feel like, just from my perspective, Britishness, a lot of it has to do with language, the accent, and the privilege that comes with that.
Thank you very, very much. It's a great answer, and it's been great to catch up with you after all these years.
Thank you so much. It's been so good seeing you again, Thomas.
Thank you. I've got a heart out. I must go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to British Culture Albion Never Dies. If you want to get in touch with me, then do send me a message on Instagram at Fleming Never Dies. Send me an email at albionneverdies@gmail.com, and if you're in Guangzhou on the 2nd of November, why not go along to Canton Place and join the British Day celebrations.